The Detroit Pistons officially introduced Ron Holland today, at the same time made a trade for Tim Hardaway Jr., sending out Quinn Grimes. We're going to break all of that down in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Koo Cahill. You can find me over on Twitter at Koo Cahill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. You'll hear more about Game Time a little bit later. So we are joined by friend of the podcast, Bryce Simon, obviously co-host of the Pistons Pulse podcast as well. You guys all know who Bryce is. We're going to talk about the Pistons introducing Ron Holland, and I want to get Bryce's thoughts on the Pistons obviously selecting Ron Holland. And then we'll talk about the trade that sent Quinn Grimes to Dallas. If you guys listened to a few of the episodes last week when it was initially reported by Mark Stein that this is something that could happen, you guys probably know where I stand on it already, but we'll talk about it later, and I want to hear where Bryce stands on it. And then also we'll talk about expectations heading into free agency, which is a few days away. Pistons still have $50+ million in cap space. We'll talk about all of that as well. But Bryce, first off, how are you doing, man?
I'm good, man. It's been a little bit of a marathon. You probably hear it in my voice just a little bit. It's starting to go after all those hours going live for the draft. I just recorded a little NBA draft, recap as well. I got some stuff tomorrow. So my voice is trying to hang on here, but it's been fun. It's been a blast. Things are going well, and it doesn't stop, right? Like you mentioned it. I was like, okay, deep breath. The draft is over. And then someone's like, NBA free agency on Sunday. I was like, oh man, like we're right back into it. Then summer league. And then after summer league, I feel like we get a little bit of a rest. And then that's whenever people like me and you are just scrounging for content and what to talk about.
Yeah, that time is not a time I'm looking for, but at least at that time we'll be able to go, maybe part-time a little bit and kind of cool down and relax. But I was going to say the same thing. The draft happens and it has not stopped since then. And you didn't even mention the Pistons don't even have a head coach yet. So that's coming soon. That's coming.
I forget this part of it. Like it doesn't matter. It's draft, trades, free agency. Oh yeah. Maybe we should hire the guy that's going to decide who plays and who doesn't and how they play.
It's a crazy moment right now for the Pistons this offseason. It's just a crazy time. There's a lot going on. But obviously we'll start off with Ron Holland. I was at the presser today. The Pistons introduced Ron Holland with Trajan Langdon. I wouldn't say there was anything really crazy said in this presser. There wasn't anything new that wasn't said the night that they drafted him by Ron or Trajan. The only real thing that I thought was interesting at all that was mentioned, Sean Corp of Detroit Bad Boys actually asked Trajan Langdon about, taking a home run swing instead of playing it safe. And his response was, I didn't view Ron as a safe pick. I'm very confident in him. I don't agree that he has a low floor. I think he has a high floor. I think he has a high ceiling as well. I have the utmost belief in this young man, blah, blah. So that's the only interesting thing he said. He didn't look at it as a home run swing. He thought this was the safe pick, which I think he might be doing a little, quarterback speak with that. But so Bryce, where did you have Ron Holland on your board? Because a lot of people I know on draft Twitter had him really, really high. It wasn't matching up a lot with what the national media really, it seemed like, at least from my perspective, where they had him on mocks. But I know people on Twitter, people I respect that do coverage, had him really high. Where did you have him?
Yeah. So was Bobby there as part of that as well, or no?
No, he wasn't there. I don't think that trade can be official or finalized like July 1st, 2nd, or sometime around there.
Okay, I was just curious. I want to know if it's just a Ron thing or if Clintman was there as well. So I had Ron. I ended up with him at number 9 on my board, but I want to be very clear about something. I had him as high as 3-4 at times. And I've said for a while that I thought he had the best potential of being a real two-way wing in this draft in terms of a guy that can really score on the offensive end and then also be an impact defensively on the other end. It just, as I continued to do mocks, I found myself having a hard time figuring out where to place him. So I think this was one of those things where my doing mock drafts kind of skewed where I ranked him, because I finally had to ask myself, if I don't think he fits here, and I don't think he fits here, and I don't think he fits here, and I don't think he fits here, is he really the number 4 player on the board? You know what I mean? And then I did hear some things about maybe workouts. Were they going well? Were they not? And some of those type of things. So I don't want Pistons fans to be like, oh, he had him 9. He must not like him at all. All these dudes were in the same tier for me anyway. So it's not like it was 3 guys tier break, 3 guys tier break, and then Ron Holland. I mean, if somebody had him 3 or 4, I know, what was it? KOC had him 1. I mean, I see it. I understand, because I think the ceiling is really there for Ron Holland.
So before I ask you about, him as a player in particular, real quick, I do want to ask, what was your reaction when they selected him at 5? Because I've said on the podcast before, I was shocked. And It wasn't about, I've said this numerous times, I don't want people to get confused. I'm interested to see where you're at. I wasn't shocked so much because I think Ron Holland's a bad player. I thought he was a bad prospect or anything. We didn't hear about him really at all to the Pistons beforehand. Klinging fell to 5, and it felt like that was like the what everyone was seeing to happen. The dominoes fell right into that, and the Pistons were going to trade back. Like that was my complete belief. As soon as it happened, I'm in the press room. I'm sitting there. I'm telling our guy Czar, I'm like, oh, it just happened. This is what they wanted. They're going to trade back. They're going to get assets. This is what's going to happen. So I was shocked they drafted Ron Holland. What was your reaction when it came up that they drafted Ron?
Almost exactly the same, Koo. I was the same way when Atlanta didn't take Klingen 1, and we knew that Sarr was going to go 2. My thing with the Pistons was, does Memphis trade up to 3, right? Does Houston look to trade out? So Houston takes Reed. I was pretty sure San Antonio wasn't going to take Klingen. So I'm like, yep, here's the trade back. Memphis is going to trade. I wonder if what happened, I wonder if Memphis just said, hey, we're cool with Klingen or Edey. And so if Klingen goes before us, whatever, we'll take Edey at 9 and we'll feel good.
I will say, to back up your point, and I did say this on the last podcast for those who listened, Trajan did say after the draft that when he was asked about this, he said that the calls did start to dry up once the 5th overall pick actually came on. He said there was a lot of talk heading into it, but once the 5th overall pick actually came on board and it was their time, he said that the calls did dry up. So
interesting.
For what it's worth.
And that's what I understand the fan base yelling at, you could have got him at 7 or 8 or 9 or wherever. I get it. Trajan has to have the offer on the table that makes sense, because if let's say they really like Ron Holland, he's the number 1 player on their board. I don't think that's crazy at 5 by any means. And even if you think you can go back to 7, what if you don't? There is a risk in trading back that you may not get him. So I'm okay with them taking here, but I was shocked. I didn't think it was going to be him. There was all the Modest Bazelis stuff. There all of a sudden was some Tijan Salon stuff. Holland wasn't the guy. And I want to talk about this with you because I'm curious to get your thoughts. I had really harped on his lack of shooting. And because of that, does that make sense with everybody else on the roster? I had somebody that brought up a really good point to me. Who was the answer, though, Koo, with the shooting? Reza Shea and Shepard were the good floor spacers other than Dalton Connect that were, so Castle's off the board. Those guys are off the board. Connect ended up going 17 and has defensive concerns. Buzelis has shooting concerns. Topic has shooting concerns. Salon has shooting concerns. Cody Williams has shooting concerns. Like, it just even Devin Carter, who shot well this last year, was a 1-year sample. So I was curious what you thought in terms of just from that perspective. Was there a better option if they'd said, we just want to address the floor spacing?
So this point is exactly why I said on the night that they drafted him on the podcast. I said that, look, this was probably going to be a conversation that we had no matter what after the draft, because whoever they drafted was probably not going to be able to shoot. They fell to 5. It was unfortunate. And the people at 5, the prospects at 5, unless someone fell, the prospects there, all of them were going to have shooting concerns. So no matter who they picked, there were going to be fans saying this exact same thing. And look, like I said on that podcast, I get it. I completely understand the fact that, hey, you need to eventually add shooting. I get it. I completely understand. My point is, and like you just said, there wasn't anyone else at 5 that was like, oh, he's a shooter, you should have taken him. If you take Dalton at 5, knowing that he was going to fall now we know he was going to fall to 17. That would have been a reach. Why do you want them to reach on a guy, or would you rather them get who they think is the best player available? It was a tough position.
Or we'd be having a completely opposite conversation of, is this team ever going to defend anybody? Because Cade's not a great defender. J.I. is not a great defender. Dalton's not a great defender. Duran's not a great defender. Good luck, Asar. Go out there and guard everybody. And, we didn't know it at the time, but then they trade for Tim Hardaway Jr., who also not a great defender. So, I mean, it's just like, honestly, these two moves now, and I don't know, we don't want to get into the trade just yet, but you got a good defender in Ron. I want to talk about his defense because I'm little worried people will expect what we saw from Asar, and I don't know that he's quite going to be that, at least how solid he is defensively at the point of attack and some things. But then we'll talk about Tim Hardaway Jr. later. But like, it wasn't a great position. The easiest position was if Reza Shea fell. Like, that was it. And I still had people coming at me hating Reza Shea at 5. They didn't like it. And I'm like, no, this is the best of both worlds. This is a kid that can defend and he can space the floor, even if there wasn't real upside. Here's the upside swing. I said it and I will say it again. If you told me, and I think this may be the most valuable position in the NBA, Koo, is a two-way wing. If you told me one of these guys was going to become that, I think your best bet is probably Ron Holland. Now, what is the percentage chance of that outcome? I don't know, but there is a chance, there's a chance of him becoming that.
So let me ask you this. Do you want to back up the Grimes trade talk a little bit so we can talk more about Ron, or do you want to get into the trade talk?
Yeah, no, I want to, because I want to hear more about your thoughts on Ron Holland. We can do the comps thing. Like, I've put it out there, floor, median, ceiling. I've thrown out the names. I've had the pushback and all of that. I'm curious where you're at with Ron. I'll talk about the defense, whatever. So I'm cool with that, saying on Ron for a little while. I don't have any crazy takes on the Grimes THJ trade anyway. I mean, I have some thoughts, obviously, but.
Okay, so we'll push back the Grimes and THJ talk probably to the third segment. We'll just have, this is audible, we'll call it live on the podcast. We'll go ahead and turn the first two segments, and we're going to go for around 40 minutes. We'll turn the first two topics into just talking about the Ron Holland selection. Then we'll combine like the Grimes trade with the free agency stuff later on. So everyone just stay tuned for that. But so real quickly, I want to get to the ads, but I'll give you my quick thoughts on Ron here, and then we can come back and talk about some more. But I didn't know much about him at all pre-draft. Didn't know much about him at all. I knew a lot of people that I respect, people like Roe, who writes over at Schwitz Theory, really good stuff. Hal, there was a lot of guys I saw in draft Twitter that had Ron Holland really high on their board and thought that he was the best. I saw some people, like you said, KOC, who thought that he was one of the best, if not the best prospect in the draft. So I understand that. My thought pre-draft, just thinking, I didn't really think about him at all because, again, it wasn't talked about much with him. And I mean, I said this before, that like weeks ago, I was really finding myself in a tough spot because my philosophy is always take best player available.
Sure.
But the Pistons are in a position where I feel like they force you now to be like, okay, should you consider fit at all at this point? Because usually I'm always best player available. You don't ever want to miss out on the best player. But I feel like the Pistons kind of forced me into being like, okay, you might need to like maybe move off of that and get a fit. Yeah. So I didn't really think about him at pre-draft. But when we come back, we're going to talk more about this, and we'll go back and forth about Ron Holland and his fit and his future with the team and what this means. So stay tuned for all of that. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Game Time is the best for me because, look, I'm a procrastinator. I wait to the last second with quite literally everything, and oftentimes it screws me when it comes to buying tickets. But with Game Time, you got last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater events near you. And another great thing about Game Time, you don't get the tickets show up and you're like, oh, man, these weren't the great seats. No, you can see at that point in the app what your seats look like. You get view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know if you're getting the right seats for you. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed with Game Time. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. So let's go ahead and continue our conversation about Ron Holland. So your co-host, Sam, he wrote some stuff that upset a section of the fan base, and then also kind of gave the other section of the fan base like some ammo. Like it turned into a civil war. And I'm not going to lie to you. I feel like the Pistons fan base has been at a civil war for 2 years. Like I feel like it's been a nonstop civil war for like years now at this point. But he said some things about the pick on Ron. I don't want to go into everything he said, but there's one thing he said that I really do agree with. I disagree with it was a bad pick because, again, if they're going best player available, that's usually my philosophy. I just can't, like I said before, I was having struggle with it, but I can't, it's going to be hard for me to ever fault anybody for taking who you think is the best player at that pick. It's going to be hard for me to do it. There's one thing he did say that I've been saying for a long time, and people have come at me because they don't like the fact that I'm moving off with some of the young guys. They don't like the fact that I want to trade the young guys. But he said something that he's not the only one I've heard this from. I'm telling everyone listening. He is not the only national guy that has come up to me that I've talked with that has said this thing. A lot of people feel this way. And basically what he's saying is people say you can stagger them. You can bring some of them off the bench. You don't have to play them together. When you take, 5, 6 players, top 5, your plan with those players are not to, well, this guy would be a starter and the other guys would be bench players. That's not what your plan is. Like, I don't care what spin anyone tries to put on it, PR, the team, whatever anyone tries to put on it. When you are selecting that high and you continually draft that high, the point is that those guys will synergize together, make each other better, and can play together on the floor. And there are severe questions about whether that can happen with literally every player on this roster besides Cade. Like, Cade's the one that, he's above everybody. But everyone else, there is questions about whether any of them can play together with Cade. And I think that's a fair point that he made, that eventually they are going to have to choose. Like, they're going to have to eventually move off of some of these guys and make it. Trajan spoke about this. Create an environment that's good for the young guys. Is it a good environment if none of them really fit together and they're playing out of sorts and playing out of position and having to do things they can't do? What's your thoughts on that, Bryce?
No, I mean, we've talked about this multiple times. I mean, the one reason I thought maybe they weren't going to go that way is I feel like Trajan talked about like this KJI backcourt and figuring out what that is. And, so it made me wonder if we weren't going to see him move on from the young guys. I think I would love to know. These are the insights I would love to know, is if they took a swung on Ron because maybe they looked at J.I., Asar, Jalen, what they could ever get in free agency and those type of things, and said, hey, this might be our chance to get a number 2 guy. This might be the guy to be our number. And when I'm saying number 2 guy, like number 2 scoring option, like you said, Cade is the dude with ball in hand. And then Ron is this 2-way wing that can be a 20-point a game scorer that is, really able to be that eventually. And it should be. Ron is 18 years old right now, doesn't turn 19 for another week or so here. And so, like, I'm not saying he's going to come in and do that right away, obviously. Now, that doesn't mean that Asar can't be a part of that picture. Doesn't mean that maybe Jalen can't be a part of it, or J.I. But to your point, unless they figure out the shooting, unless Fred Vincent is the best in the business by far, it's hard for those 5 guys to see the floor together, Koo. It just really is. And what I would love to know, I brought this up a couple times, how many top 5 picks have been second unit, 6th men, 7th men on the team that originally drafted them? How often has that happened? I would be fascinated to know how often that's happened, because I'm quick to do that, right? Like, hey, you can play Cade, Ron, Asar, and then 3 floor spacers around him, right? Find a floor spacing big and then bring J.I. and J.D. off the bench. But are J.I. and J.D. going to do that? And are they going to want to do it on their second contract with the team that drafted them? I don't know how that stuff all plays out. Do you think they still move one? Like, to me, the Ron Holland pick makes me feel more like that they're like, I swing back to they are going to move 1 or 2 of them this summer.
I've been in the camp of you have to move them. I've been in that camp all summer that if it was me, I'd be moving J.I. or Duren. I wouldn't be mad about moving both of them, because this is how it's been viewed for me. Cade and Asar, from what I understand, are like the guys they view very highly. Like, those guys are, and whether it's because people think Asar is actually better than J.I. or not, or actually better than J.D. or not, he was the one recently drafted. He's the one that's the most unknown at this point. He has the highest ceiling, so therefore, and he has that 2-way ability. So that's what I've understood, that those 2 guys are above the rest. You get Ron. This is Trajan's guy. This is the Trajan's first pick.
Yep.
This is he spoke very highly of him. So obviously Ron's going to be above guys because this is Trajan. This is the other guys were not Trajan's pick. So if those 3 guys are your core guys, this is just my thing. I think people develop emotional attachment to players, and I don't think anyone could reasonably make the basketball argument that if your 3 guys are Cade, Asar, and Ron, the best guys to surround them with is Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren. Like if they weren't Detroit Pistons, if they weren't drafted by the Pistons, if they were free agents, would people come up to me and say, I really think that J.I. and J.D. are the best options to really surround your main guys with? No one would say that. So it's like, to kind of tie it back into just the Ron Holland pick, if you're going to go, like Trajan said in his presser after selecting him, that having guys like Asar and Ron are rare. He said it's rare to have these kind of players, these kind of ceilings with each other. He said he doesn't think they can play together initially, maybe, but he views them being able to play together at a very high level in the future. And I think the comparison that people have been making, I think even Trajan mentioned to it, but like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, 2 guys who are two-way players, develop their shots, and like you mentioned earlier, 2-way guys at the wing are probably the most valuable pieces in the NBA in 2024. Having guys that can guard 1 through 4, switch across, play defense, attack gaps, kick out, make the right plays. Like that's the most valuable player outside of just having like a top 5 player in the league, obviously. But like, that's what you want. So I get why he took Ron if that's how he views him as. And if he views it as we have Ron and now we have Asar, if we can just get one of them to be a good shooter, if we can get one of them to develop, we're set at the wings. And if you go back and look at Trajan's history with the New Orleans, that's all he did. He went out and just got wings. Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Dyson Daniels, like that. That's what he went out and got. Brandon Ingram, like there's guys. That's what he does. So that's long way. That's my answer. Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good. Like I love it. Cook, man, it's your show. You can go the whole time if you want. The one thing I will say is I wonder if you can do it initially though. Like if initially you could start, J.I. and Asar, and then bring Ron and Duren off the bench or something like that. You know what I mean? Like just for a year or so. Like the hard thing is, like, is JD going to go from all the games he started to now he's going to be willing to go out? J.I. is a little bit more realistic because it's already happened to him once. And so maybe he would be willing to do, but I think Ron off the bench and one other of them opens up enough spacing where you could at least see it, for a year. Maybe Trajan would want to see. I want to see J.I. with my own eyes, watching day in and day out with whoever the new coach is. I want to see this with my own eyes before I make a move. I want to see why JD is not as good defensively as what maybe he could be with my own eyes and the coaches I've put in place. I just wonder, and I would understand that. I would respect that for a year of filling that out before you made a decision on it. Or even if it's 50 games and then it's the trade deadline, like what we saw with Sadiq Bey, right? You don't have to make the decision on their contracts and those type of things. And like, I want this team to win more games, but they're not going to go get in the play-in right now. Like, I don't think that's what they're going to do. And so let's work through this, win 10 plus more games, 12 plus more games, and you're still right there in the Cooper Flag, Ace Bailey, all of those guys' sweepstakes to add to the roster.
So, Bryce, you know this. There's 2 points I want to hit on real quick and get your thoughts on before we get into the trade that happened and free agency. The first thing I want to say is, like you mentioned, I think a lot of people just view it, and this is not a disrespectful comment. I'm being for real. I think a lot of people just immediately go to like treating this like 2K, where you can just throw players at this position, that position, sixth man, eighth man, and just do it.
Without emotion. There's no emotion in 2K. Emotion.
It's not going to happen. I'm telling you, it will not happen. If Jalen Duren, I'm not saying that they would refuse to play off the bench, but it's going to be a tough sell to these guys who think my ceiling is way up here. This team just won 14 games and you're benching me?
Yeah.
This team just won 14 games and I'm the one getting benched? I'm not playing? You're trying to limit my ceiling? You're trying to limit where I can become? I'm 19 and you're trying, like, people think well, who cares what they think? Yeah, well, if you don't get buy-in from them in that position, what's the point of even having them? If they're not bought into that, then they're not going to develop bad habits. Then it becomes issues. So if you're not going to have
and worse, like then their trade value tanks, right? Like JD goes and averages 8 and 8 because he's unhappy. Well, now you're trading a disgruntled 20-year-old who's not averaging 12 and 12, even if you want to trade him. So like this could go a slippery slope real fast. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm glad you included that. I just think people don't understand that part of it, is that you have to take into account the relationships and emotions too of what would happen. What happens if this, and will I get buy-in to essentially achieve what my end goal is, which is they develop in these limited roles. Like that's the stuff you got to take into. And then the next thing I want to get your input on, I don't know if you heard it, but did you see the quote Trajan had about, I want to create a good environment for the young guys to develop? Did you hear that?
I didn't. I'll be honest. I don't pay a lot of attention to pressers because I think so much it's lip service. So
it might be. You're right. It might be complete lip service. It's fair. Could be quarterback speak. But he said in his initial introductory press conference, he said one of his goals were that he wants to create an environment that allows the young guys to develop, because he doesn't feel like the Pistons have had one that has allowed young guys to develop. After the presser, one-on-one, James asked him, you said this, but do you think you can do that while having 7, 8 young guys you're trying to – can those two things work at the same time? And from what I feel like, Trajan kind of played both hands. He didn't really give an answer. He kind of like played both sides. He said, I want all these guys to develop, but you're right. You can't have too many because then it's going to be – you can't really do all – like he kind of played both sides. So when we come back, I want to get your thoughts. Do you think – they can do that? Do you think they can create a good environment for the guys that they really value? Let's say Cade and whoever else you want to throw in there. Is it possible to create a good environment for those guys while also keeping all of them together and trying to develop all of them at the same time? We'll get Bryce's answer when we come back. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, and you'll get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers at ebaymotors.com. So you guys know who I am. You guys, subscribe button, 5-star review. You guys get that. Bryce, I want to get your answer. I don't want you to run out of time and us not be able to get the free agency. I want your answer on that. Where are you feeling there?
No, I think it's a great point. My short answer is no. I think they're getting really close to that. And a lot of that is because there's so many non-shooters in that group of players. And I've said this, we all want to see this team get better. Right now, there are 9 dudes that you feel like you have to give playing time to. Cade, J.I., Asar, Ron, JD, Sasser, Tim Hardaway Jr. I guess you don't have to, but if you just traded for him, like I would assume he's going to be really pissed if he doesn't get to play a little bit.
To buffer your point, and then you go right back to it, Tom Gore said at the introductory press conference, he does not want to have any more money just sitting on the bench. He said last year they had a lot of money that just was riding the bench. He said he doesn't want that no more. So I'd be shocked if THJ is not playing a big role.
Fontecchio and Stu. I'm pretty sure I named all 9. I think I counted right here. Every once in a while, I'm a little bit off. I think that's 9 guys with the draft pick. And so, like Bobby Clinton's a guy I like, you can go play in the G League for a year. Like, that's fine. 2nd round pick. I'm cool with that. The two-way guys, whatever. My point is that's already 9, Koo. You got to build out this roster and make it better somehow. You bring in 2 dudes, that's 11. I think Wes told me the other day he put out a depth chart and he had Sasser as like the 5th guard, and people were pissed at him from somebody's going to have to not play if you want to bring in.
They don't understand the numbers game. It's like, yes. It is what it is.
You want to bring in Najee Marshall and Isaiah Hartenstein? Who's not playing? That's 11 dudes. That's JD. I think Isaiah Stewart should be playing the majority of his minutes at the 5. And who's not playing of that group? Tell me, because it's got to be one of them. So that's my thing is, who do you move on from? And it's like, I think it's easy to say, well, just trade Stewart. Listen, I know you're not the biggest Stu guy.
No, I will say I've become a big Stu guy. He impressed me a lot this year. I ate crow. I apologize.
Okay, good.
It impressed me.
And someone told me, like, put him back in the starting line. No, do not put Stu back in the starting lineup. Leave him coming off the bench where he is in a role that is successful for him. Talking about this, you know why I think Simone Fontecchio looked so good for the Pistons? Because he was the one guy on the team in the role that he should be playing. Just catch and shoot and make shots and be a neutral defender. Everybody else is trying to play roles above what they're really capable of. This is why I don't hate the Tim Hardaway Jr. trade. Listen, Tim Hardaway Jr. can come in and take as many shots as he wants, as far as I'm concerned, because they don't have a real bucket getter on the team anyway. Like, let these other guys fall into roles that are okay for them. And we'll talk more about that as well. But if you want to add 3 real free agents, who's not in the rotation? Because that's 2 guys of the 9 that I named, okay, that can't get in the rotation. You know what I mean? So.
No, you're making the same points that I've made on the podcast. So I'm glad me and you are on the same page with this, because and like you said, just to, kind of buffer what you said, you mentioned that you think Stu is best at the 5. I think all of us agree with that. And I think even last year you started to see Stu realize that. I thought you started to see the Pistons realize that.
Yep.
And I think that's part of the reason, like you mentioned with Fontecchio, he started to play so well because he actually started being played in the role he's in.
Yep.
So if he's the one guy you've actually paid and given a contract to, who actually has gotten better, why would you then move him to a spot as the backup 4 where you're, again, not really putting him in the greatest environment? If your goal is to put him in the greatest environment, it would be the backup 5. Well, so are you actually creating the best environment? Or are you just throwing a bunch of sticks at the wall and seeing what sticks?
I mean, the guy I think that is the poster child for this is actually Asar at times last year. Asar should be your 5th option offensively right now in his career, maybe 4th, and then it starts to grow, right? But there was too many times where Asar was having to make too many plays and take too many shots and all of that at his age as a rookie with where his skill level. And this is not me taking shots at Asar. You're talking about having to eat a little crow. I had to eat a little crow with Asar, especially on the defensive end. That was not who I wanted at 5. Like, straight up, I hold my own receipts. I wanted Cam Whitmore. He went 15 picks later, so I look like an idiot. But like, here's where I'm at on the offseason, and this can lead into the Tim Hardaway Jr. stuff. I have kind of gone away from the star hunting. I don't know that I necessarily want them to go get Brandon Ingram, but I do think they need to bring in guys that can take on some usage offensively, that can really space the floor, that can score the basketball. Because who's the team's second best scorer right now?
THA.
Probably, right? Like, but if it's not, they're going to ask J.I. to do it. He's not going to be successful doing that. Now, I'm not saying bury him and don't give him chances. I'm just saying night in and night out, I don't know that what he needs to be right now. Even if it is, who's the 3rd leading scorer? Asar? Is that what we want Asar to have to do? I think that's asking him too much. So, like, you may hate this, I've even warmed up to like a very short-term deal for a Tobias Harris to come in.
I'm good with it.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm okay with it. If they sign him for 4 years, I will come on every podcast and say that's an awful contract. If they give him the Bruce Brown 1+1, I'm okay with that. It's a position that they need to fill. Like, him and Stu off the bench at the 4 and 5, or, whatever. Like, maybe Tobias wouldn't come off the bench, but you know what I mean? Like, I am leaning a little bit more towards those type of guys, some veterans that can take some usage, that can score the ball, they can space the floor. Ideally, there's some defense in this as well, right? That's something THJ doesn't do. That's something Tobias doesn't do. But that's kind of where I'm at now. Like, Najee Marshall, again, I've said it multiple times, is a guy I'm really intrigued by. He may not take the high usage, but a 3-and-D wing that can come in and do some of these things.
So let's go ahead and segue that, like you said, into the offseason. So the offseason has started ahead of free agency, about 2 days away. They've made a trade. They trade Quentin Grimes for THJ and 3 second-round picks. I want to hear your thoughts on it, because on the last podcast, I read Mark Stein's Substack. I wasn't happy. I did not think this would happen. I was not wanting this to happen. Then it actually happened. I wasn't happy. So I want to get your thoughts, and everyone to hear did you like this trade? Do you think it was a good one? Do you think I'm off? Where are you at with it?
No, like, as much as I just said, like, Tim Hardaway Jr. is probably their second scorer, I don't necessarily want that to be the case going into the season. Like, I know I just went on a rant about that. I hope that's not the case. Like, they need to sign somebody. And that's where the counter is, like, I still don't think it's BI, but they need to get somebody that can really get some buckets. That's why I kind of liked Malik Monk, the idea of that, where he could just come in and take that usage. I hated it initially, like hated it. The first time I had somebody text me about it, I hated it. I'm a little more okay with it. The overall process of this sucks, and it's not even Trajan's fault because it goes across two front offices of how they handled Bojan and Burks. Grimes, if anything was going to be positive out of that trade, it was going to be Grimes. Now you move Grimes for, 1 year of THJ and the 3 second-round picks. I would just like to know the injury stuff with Grimes, and is there just a complete lack of faith of him being able to be what he was his second year in New York? Because I actually thought that he made sense. Like, he can space the floor and he can defend, and that's where I'm struggling with this a little bit. And the other factor here is, like, maybe Trajan just isn't a fan. Maybe he doesn't trust the medicals, and maybe he doesn't want to have to pay Grimes and make a decision on that here in the near future. And so he thought it was better to get some future assets and then potentially get a guy in Tim Hardaway Jr. that can come in and just really space the floor, provide some bucket getting that this team needs to help these other guys fill into roles that they should be in.
So I agree with you. I initially hated it. I still hate it though. I wish I could warm up to it, but like, I think the value is just the asset management of it. I didn't like. I know they got 3 second-round picks, but like you said, part of it isn't Trajan's fault because basically what this has now turned into is Bojan, Burks in a second for THJ in 3 seconds.
Yep.
Like it's just not happy about that. But the first end of the part, like you said, is not really on Trajan. That's on Troy for waiting so long to move on from Bojan and Burks. And then, like you said, the key piece of that was Grimes. And now you've moved Grimes for basically to fill up your cap space, basically. You trade him for that in an expiring contract and 3 second-round picks that I just don't. I know some people are trying to say that second-round picks will become more valuable with this CBA. I'll believe it when I see it. Like, I see teams buy second-round picks all the time. Like, until I see that actually happen, I'm not going to move my opinion on it. So I just don't think it was a good value trade, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. But yeah, it is what it is. THJ, he can come in and score. He can space the floor for sure, but I think the Pistons might have gave up the better player just for an expiring. And
yeah. A younger player, the defensive side of the floor for sure. I mean, if I was getting the first 4 months of last season, Tim Hardaway Jr., I would be all over this. He was incredible for 4 months. And then, like, I don't even care that he couldn't play in the playoffs because the Pistons aren't going to the playoffs. That doesn't matter. We all know the game changes anyway. He wasn't good the last 2 months. Like, his season, 40% from the field, 35% from three. Not bad because it's crazy volume from three. His last 5 seasons, 15 on 42, 38, 81 from the free throw line. I do think he's played quite a few games. So, like, over the last 5 seasons. So, like, maybe he's able to come in and just do that. So, again, I like the idea of this type of player coming in. Like, Tim Hardaway Jr. has no conscience. Like, he will come in and he will jack and shoot and miss and keep shooting. I don't mind like a volume floor spacer kind of bucket getter in this mold. I don't mind that. I just really like the idea of Quentin Grimes. But like I said, here's the thing with we cannot judge Trajan based on anything other than how he valued Quentin on his roster, because he didn't trade for Quentin. He inherited Quentin. And if he says, listen, I don't trust the medicals, or I flat out don't think this kid's that good, or I'm not even going to come close to paying what his representation wants, then this is probably a good move to go ahead and get rid of him. And there's going to be some of that, right? Koo, when you bring in a new guy and he inherits this roster, he's not going to like every player, especially on a roster that just won 14 games. If he did like every player, he probably wasn't the right guy to hire.
And I think we might see more of that. We might see more examples of this. I will say before we're getting close to the end, so I do want to get your thoughts on the offseason, what you expect to happen in free agency, what you want to happen moving forward. But I do want to say this at the end. I've heard from multiple people that Grimes want to be here was part of it as well. That I've heard for a while that there was a lot of whispers and mumbling about him not even wanting to be here for real. So
and that's the side of it we don't always know, right? I mean, to equate it to what just happened yesterday, right? Was the draft just yesterday? Second round? Yeah, yesterday with whenever you look at those second round picks, you have to take some of that with a grain of salt because guys maneuver. Bronny James isn't the only player that's ever maneuvered his way to a specific team.
I mean, his teammate Austin Reeves did it. So
yeah, that's the textbook example. I think Jay Williams called it out on ESPN or somewhere today. So people do it all the time. And you know what happens once guys get into the league, right? And so if Grimes isn't happy, move him, right? Like I assume Tim Hardaway Jr. might be, I don't know, like I guess he's leaving a team that just played in the finals, but if he wants to get a bunch of shots up, he's going to get to do that. And coming off the bench, maybe he'll be happy and maybe he'll raise his value, right? And they'll get a couple more second rounders for him. And now it'll be 5 second-round picks, which we just learned can get you back to what, 24, 26 or something like that in the first round. So I don't know. Like I'd like to think that Grimes was exactly the archetype of player this team needed. And I think that's why it's a hard pill for me to swallow.
All right, so we'll wrap it up with this. So, Bryce, I know you have to get out of here, so you don't have to take too long with this answer. What's your expectations from here on out? We're recording this on the 28th. Free agency is like 3 days. What are you expecting for the Pistons to do? Are you expecting them to make more trades? Are you expecting to see some young guys go? Are you expecting them to make some signings, some free agency? What's your expectations moving forward now that they've selected Ron Holland?
Yeah, I feel like my one signing, I'll just stick with Najee Marshall, that they bring him in. I kind of wonder if there's one free agent signing. Like, again, if they sign Hartenstein, who I think is a little more open after the Knicks trade. I don't know what their cap situation is now. I know they're up against the first apron now. You know, what does that mean for JD? What does that mean for Stewart? I think that would be the name. Like, do you go after a guy like Gary Trent Jr. or somebody like that? I also wouldn't hate them, like some of these restricted free agents, Patrick Williams, Isaac Okoro, looking at those type of guys and just like, hey, you guys gonna be willing to match this or not? I expect at least one more trade of a similar type contract, not a complete Joe Harris-Sin contract, but a Tim Hardaway Jr. This guy's making too much money for the team he's on, but on the Pistons, there's a role and a path to him coming in and helping them. I would like to see some sort of real bucket getter added to this team in some capacity, right? Like we kind of joked about the Tim Hardaway Jr. thing. I think they need that because I think they need a number 2 scorer. So then whoever can fall into number 3 and then 4 and then 5. If we're asking somebody currently on the roster on June 28th to be the second leading scorer, it's not even about wins and losses, Koo. I just don't think guys are going to be in the roles that they need to be in to be successful at this point in their career.
All right, quick answer. Do you think they trade one of the young guys?
Yes.
Okay, we'll wrap it up there. You guys hold Bryce to that. Clip that and hold it and bookmark it and hold it.
Aggregate it, tweet it all. Tweet it all.
All right, I appreciate you, Bryce. You guys can go follow him on Twitter at Motor City Hoops. Find him on the Pistons Pulse and also his podcast with Sam Vicini. Appreciate you again, Bryce, for coming on, man. I appreciate all you guys for making it your first listen of every single day. Free and available on your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe on the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review or whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Till next time, enjoy you guys this weekend. Some more stuff might happen over the weekend before free agency. Who knows? But I'll be there to cover it. I'll catch you guys later. Bryce will too, obviously, with the Pistons Pulse. But until then, I'll see you guys later. Peace out.